Hello and welcome to another edition of the Watchful Citizen, a local access program presented by the Lancaster County Democratic Party. I'm your host, Jane Egan. Today's guest is Larry Scherer, candidate for Legislature. Larry is running for the pleasure to represent Legislative District 21, which is the northwestern portion of Lancaster County. Larry, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much,
Glad to
Jane.
have you.
Good to be here.
Share with us and our viewers a little bit about your background and why are you running for a seat in the legislature?
Great, be glad to do that. I grew up on a farm in York County. Actually started out in Polk County, small family farm, and which is now sold. But it's that kind of a rural upbringing, small school, and that I come from. I still have a real tie to the earth. I feel closeness to it, and that's why we live on an acreage. So went to high school there, and then UNL, and farmed after my father passed when I was in high school for a while, but decided I wanted to move on to something else. So that was the early years, law school, and then a short stint working for the Burlington Northern Railroad between undergrad and law school. And that was a good experience for me. I met a lot of people I still know today. And after that, I decided, after law school, I became interested in politics. It was the 70s were, as you know, very turmoil. There was an oil embargo and demonstrations in the early 70s and so on. So I think I became politically active during that time frame. First job, though, out of law school was working for the legislature, where I worked for 15 years, and that's where I really caught the legislative policy bug, and I've been interested in ever since. I've worked about 15 years there for the Education Committee. I was legal counsel for education and also business and labor committees. So great experience. I think that everybody should have a chance to see closely the process. It's fascinating, and the citizen legislators that we have there put in a lot of time. The staff help, and we have a good staff in the legislature. So that was my indoctrination into the legislative process. After that, I worked for a higher education commission and the NSEA. I'm currently there as research director, and so I've had connections to the legislature ever since. The reason I want to run now, I think, is partly time of life. I'm close to retirement. I'm not done yet, but I do want to do something to give back. The issues that interested me my whole life on how we use the land and protect our environment, and education. Education's so important to everyone, and just treating everybody fairly while trying to bring everybody up. And so there's good jobs for everybody to go around. So it's time, either do it now or 8 years is, hopefully I can do that if elected and make a difference in that period of time, and feel like I've left the state a little bit better than I came into it.
So you've been heavily involved all your life, but never really ran for office. This would be your first foray into that.
My first.
Tell us about your campaign and how you're reaching voters.
Well, I announced for election in June, and July 1st I started knocking on doors, and started, as you said, the district is Northwest Lincoln and Lancaster County. The city part of that, Autumnwood, is where I started walking, and then sort of moved southwest. And there's actually a little piece in south of O Street between 33rd and 56 that goes all the way to Van Dorn Street. So I've been walking until it got too cold. Then people, I don't think they like to open their doors as much when it's that cold, but you do get invited in more often. So actually today I think it's nice enough again I might go out and walk. And so that's been the primary form now.
So person-to-person contact is what you're
Person to
saying,
person,
basically.
yeah.
So do you have
It's the
staff
best.
members? Do you have a website?
Yes, I do have one. I have two. One's a sort of an administrative assistant, Lindsay, and then Brody Weber is my field director in communications. And Brody's been planning. We've had phone banks the last few weeks, so that's the other way we're reaching. In addition to the website, votelarryscherer.com, I think it is. And
Okay.
there's a Facebook page. So if you just
Great.
Google Larry Scherer, you'll find both of those and can follow me that way.
Great. You mentioned property tax as something that's important to you, school funding. Tell us more. Let's start with the property tax. That's something that is certainly been in the news as far as Governor Ricketts is concerned. Where are you on that issue?
Well, I think we depend as a state, and for our services that are essential, we depend too much on property taxes. So it's an unbalanced tax system that at certain times really hits certain segments very hard. And when in the 1970s, 80s, when we had 14–15% inflation, homeowners were really getting hit because the value of homes was growing very quickly. And so there was a big, huge demand, and this is the Proposition 13 years and that. So at that point in time, it was the residential homeowners who are really feeling the hit. The last few years, it's been agricultural owners because, as you know, the price of ag land has, just been growing astronomically. And, whether that is, it's probably not going to continue, but it has created a hardship, I think, especially in the way we finance schools, because most of the students are in urban areas, most of the land is in rural areas. So when you depend that much on property tax as a base, you develop a lot of hard feelings between urban and rural. And one of the things I think I can do, having lived equal parts of my life in the city and in the country, is to bridge that gap and hopefully come up with a system that both sides feel is comfortable, so there's not as much finger pointing and there's more working for, how can we provide good services effectively, efficiently, and everybody feels like they're taxed fairly for them. It's a tall order.
It's a tall order. Property taxes are local as far as who sets the valuations of property and the tax rate. How does the state get into the picture of reducing local property taxes that are really governed by county officials? Address that. As a state legislator, what would you do to?
Well, I can tell you, I think that you have to have a shift while at the same time holding down growth to a normal level. If you suddenly inject a lot of state money into a local system where they don't feel as much accountability, the spending could go up. So when there's a shift, and this happened in 1990 when the new state aid formula was adopted, there was 20% income tax increase and a 1 cent sales tax that was for education, was for K-12 schools. And there was a 20% reduction in property taxes statewide. Now, unfortunately, over time, where the state budget gets hit revenue shortages, the state didn't keep up. So now Nebraska is 49th in funding for schools. And I would imagine if you looked at other subdivisions, it would be very, very similar. I disagree with the governor's proposal that we can sort of cut our way to property tax relief. The schools have been spending about 3.1% over the last 10 years, and the state has been spending about that much. So we can't really point fingers and say, well, you're spending too much, property taxes be lower. That's true, but the schools would also be terribly underfunded. And I don't really think that Basic problem is the state hasn't kept up its end of the bargain. It has not kept up, funding for schools and other services so that the property tax didn't continually rise. So I don't disagree with the governor on the problem, but on the solution, I think we need to do more of a balancing of the taxes before you can put on any sort of a tight lid like he's suggesting.
There's always that yin and yang of we want a good quality education, but then how do you pay for it?
Exactly.
And most of it right now is coming out of property taxes. Do you have any ideas or any kind of, I don't know what I want to say, plan for funding it from some other sources? Or are you saying that the state was falling down on its part of the bargain as far as funding schools?
Yeah, one idea I have is I think we need to have sort of a reserve fund or a stabilization fund in the state so that when the revenues are high, we put some of that money away, whether it's from sales tax or income tax, it builds up. It's not a foreign concept at all. It's saving for a rainy day. It goes way back to biblical times when Joseph was building barns for grain for the hard years. So it's not rocket science. It's just being prepared because we know those cycles will hit the ups and downs of the markets, the ups and downs of the ag sector, and just need to be prepared. And when there's good times, don't spend a lot of new money on things that over a period of time you can't sustain. So I think I agree with the sustainability concept of the governor, but how we do it, I'm pretty far in the other direction. So hopefully there's a middle. There always is. Yeah. The other thing I should mention is I'm a mediator as well, and I'm trying to always look for interest. And so everybody has an interest in a fair tax system that doesn't burden anybody too heavily, and everybody is paying
their fair share.
Their fair share,
right.
Their ability to pay, which is not another new concept, by the way. These are all historically been around a long time. So, but the mediation background, I think, would really help. As I said before, there's too much rural-urban or too much between the parties even. I'm a Democrat and proud to be one. Historic, as I said, I came of age in the 70s when there were a lot of tough social issues, Vietnam and all of those things. So been there ever since, but I certainly know there's good people in both parties. I just happen to believe that the values of the Democratic Party are a little closer to the common man, the working people, and so I'm more comfortable there. That's where I came from.
Okay, great.
It's probably where I'll end up.
Well, we've been talking a lot about school funding. There's something called the Tax Equity and Educational Opportunities Support Act, TOSA, something that I'm not familiar with. Can you kind of describe that to us and what that's all about?
Sure. It basically, it's a simple concept. It's how much it costs to educate students, and it's basically the number of students you have and special characteristics of them, poverty and English language deficiency, transportation, distance, all those things are factored into this definition of formula need. So that's how much the state thinks, and it's pretty close to what it actually does cost. It's based on prior spending of schools of similar size. So
this is the state aid to education formula that has been used for decades now to determine how much each district gets.
Since 1990, and
okay.
I was actually one of the authors of that. I was a staffer for the Education Committee during that period of time. So not to say in 25, 26 years it hasn't changed a lot. It has. There's 50 pages of definitions, which is a little much. I think it could be simplified, but it's basically need minus resources. The biggest resource any school district has is property taxes. They also have other forms of aid from state and federal government and private grants and so on. You subtract those two and you have what's known as equalization aid. And that the state is basically saying, well, we'll guarantee to fund you to the average of similar sized schools when we subtract your resources from your need. If that's a negative number, then there is no equalization aid. One of the problems we have now, there's 170 school districts that don't receive any equalization aid. Well, as you can imagine, that causes political problems.
What makes up those 170? Is that more the rural?
It's more rural
Western?
schools, yeah. And generally speaking, probably the 50 largest school districts in the state receive the equalization aid. It's not universally true. There are a number of rural districts that don't have the property tax resources, but they also don't have very many students. So that is a problem. There are two other forms of aid in the TIOSA that aren't talked about as much, and that is the income tax rebate, which is a certain amount of the income taxes raised in each school district goes back to those districts, and that's an offset. That's the amount that every school district received. And then there's option enrollment students, where students move from District A to District B, from Raymond Central to Waverly and so on. And that's, there's probably $60 million shifting around that way. So that goes to every district regardless of wealth. And so there is some unequalized funding in there, and those are the basic components. All schools get special education funding and some other categorical gifted aid and those types of things. So,
another hot topic in Nebraska is Medicaid expansion. Our governor opted to not accept the government's Medicaid funding. What is your position on that?
I support expanding it to the extent that the federal money is there, or a reliable, sustainable state source of funding. I hate to see Nebraska citizens not helped when they could be helped. On the campaign trail, I've met a half a dozen people personally that, they say, I'm in that gap. One woman had Crohn's disease and was kind of mid-40s, living at home, had to, couldn't really afford the treatment she needed, and couldn't get insured. So that type of thing really brought it home to me. These are real people, and they aren't people that are mooching off the system. They need help, and if we can provide it, I just feel that we need to. There's bipartisan support this year again for a bill to do that. It's Senator McCollister from Omaha's bill, and Senator Campbell from Lincoln, and Senator Mello from Omaha. So I'm hoping that will pass.
That's kind of a hybrid of what we're trying to do. Wouldn't it just be easier to take the government's money, the federal government's allocation to the state of Nebraska? The thing that I have picked up from what the politicians have been saying is that they don't trust the federal government to keep their obligation. Where is that coming from? Is that just political ideologue? What's going on there?
No, there's some history. I mentioned special education earlier, and actually there's some constitutional rights for all citizens to receive equal treatment in schools, and so there were some federal court cases, and the Congress came in and passed special education legislation and said, well, we'll fund it at 40%, and the states you pick up part, and the local you pick up part. Well, the federal share has dropped. The state share has also dropped, and guess who's paying for the majority of it now? The local schools. Who else? Property taxpayers. So, no, those types of things do happen. That's why I mentioned, we have to have a plan that's sustainable to fund it. I'm not really sure if we had this Medicaid expansion, people receiving, the current plan, by the way, is a insurance pay down the use of the federal money to buy private insurance. It's a different approach, and it makes sense. Hopefully it'd be more efficient than a new government program. But the real question is, what if the money goes away at the federal level? Mm-hmm. I guess I would say this: the money for Medicaid, the money for Social Security, those basic programs that are the safety net for all Americans, they haven't gone away. They're still there, and they're important. And there's always conflict for funding between defense and roads and highways and schools and those types of things. But if there's an agreement that this is important enough for everybody to receive that support, I don't think it will go away. But if it did, the current bill says we just won't do it anymore. That's easier said now than later on. But so I think we need a fallback position that if we need to replace federal money, here's where we'll get it from. Maybe we'll get it from the sales tax on internet purchases, or maybe it will be some sort of an assessment. A number of states have assessments on hospitals and nursing homes, long-term care, assisted living. They pay a small assessment, which makes a certain amount of sense because they are benefiting from it. The program reduces the free, I can't think of the name, the amount that they can charge off as debt, and then the people with insurance pay for it through their premiums. So there's a benefit there. That makes sense to me. I think it takes some time to get agreement that where's the fairest place to get this money if the federal money does go away. And I'd like to see that up front rather than 15 years from now when suddenly the money isn't there and nobody wants to pay. It wasn't planned for. So looking to the future.
The Affordable Care Act has helped some Nebraskans, and there is that gap. Where do you stand on a single payer? I know, I'm Medicare age, and then I have military, so I've got TRICARE as supplement, so I'm good. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Over 50% of our population is currently on Medicare, or a combination of Medicare and TRICARE with our retired military.
Which is a single-payer system.
It's a single-payer system,
yeah.
And it's very affordable. Why can't we get the other 50% on that and just have a single-payer system, get rid of that third-party insurance company element, and just simplify the whole thing?
Well, in a world where you were starting over, that would probably be a simpler way to go. Right now, with the private insurance system and the investment that we have there, it's hard to make that shift. I've been to England with my wife, and she injured her ankle, and so we were in Scotland actually, and they just took care of her. We weren't even citizens, so and it was a pretty efficient. I mean, it wasn't a big injury or anything, so it makes a certain amount of sense. I think that in America, the idea of private investment and capitalism is so strong. It's hard to move towards that, but there'd still be plenty of private investment in it too. So eventually, I think we'll probably get there, just because it's so much simpler and more fair, and you don't have to worry about where you're at and which program you have and all of that. So but we're not there yet.
We're not there yet, that's for sure. Nebraska currently has a very low unemployment rate. Do you have any plans for workforce development in the state? And could you just kind of outline those for us?
The focus on workforce development, career education, I think is very important. I live in a part of the county where there's Kawasaki and a number of large employers, industrial employers. And one thing I hear from some of the people I talk to is that there's plenty of good technical jobs out there, but people aren't, you don't see very many TV shows about people that are technical. And that's a shame, because that's real life. I mean, that's where money is made, and that's where people develop good careers. So I think we need to change our whole focus, through high school especially, to discovery and getting people the ability to start working towards those careers. Most of the students today are far more technologically proficient than we are, and that's great, because that is the future. So I'd like to see a lot more career education in that area, and specifically linking it to internships and connections to the employers in that part of the city and the county and the state. So we're on our way there. The Department of Ed and career education is growing.
It's a full circle back to funding education, and
Yes.
how do we do that?
Yes.
We just have a couple of minutes left, Larry. I know that clean energy is something that you're interested in. Could you give us about a minute on your position on clean energy in the state of Nebraska?
I think we need to do a lot more to develop solar energy and wind energy. We're turning the corner, I think, thanks to Ken Haar and the work he's done. There was a great article in the paper today about Ken and his work. And I've watched him over the 8 years. I know Ken very well, and I'd like to take over doing some of those types of things. I know there are other people that will as well. Wind energy, solar energy, efficiency. We have a lot of room to go, as well as protecting our water. Water is a huge, huge thing in Nebraska, and we don't want to sell ourselves short for short-term profit. So I want to work on those issues. I really do. In law school, I wanted to go into environmental law, but went the education route and now hope to get back to working on those issues. They're very important for future generations.
For everybody.
Climate change, you look at the storms this weekend, I think it might be real, folks.
Yep, I think so too. If people want to learn more about your campaign, how can they contact you? You want to go over that again?
Sure. Yeah, I have a website. If you Google Larry Scherer, you'll see voteforlarryscherer.com. That's the website, and there's a Facebook page, Larry Scherer for Legislature. You can find very easily. You can contact me through either of those. You can send messages on either of those, so I encourage you to do so. I like to answer questions. I like to try to come up with solutions, but.
And you're probably looking for volunteers too to help you
Oh
with your campaign, right?
volunteers, yeah. Volunteers are really starting to come forward. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Sure.
This is very informative,
Yeah.
and we're glad that you're running for state legislature. We need more people to do that.
Thank you, Jane.
This has been another edition of the Watchful Citizen. Thank you for joining us. Until the next time.